Morning everyone, welcome to today's webinar, Agile PM in 30 minutes. My name's Gemma Moorhead and I'm part of the marketing team here at ILX. We'll just give it a few more moments for others to join. Great. Before I hand over to Gavin Treacy, Senior Training Consultant at ILX, there are a few housekeeping bits I need to cover. Firstly, you'll notice that you're all on mute. Please, can you remain on mute throughout the session? If you do have any questions as we go through though, there's a question box in the panel on the side of the screen where you can type them in. And unless they're technical, we'll answer them at the end during the Q&A. Secondly, this webinar is being recorded and you'll receive a follow-up email from us on Monday with a link so you can watch back and you can forward it on to your colleagues. Also, we're active on LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, so please do give us a follow. And finally, today's session is going to last about 30 minutes with time for a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to hand over to you, Gavin.
Good morning all. Thank you, Gemma. Good morning, and first of all, happy Friday to you all. I hope you've been enjoying the glorious weather and the sunshine this week, and I hope it continues for you over the weekend. So I'm going to be talking to you about Agile PM and a quick overview of the agenda of what I'm going to cover in the topic. So what is Agile and Agile PM? A brief history, very quick history. Don't worry, it's not going to turn into a school classroom history lesson. A little bit of how does it work and an overview of the phases, roles, something called the project variables, and I'll be talking to you there about what we call time, cost and quality and the importance of that. And of course, governance of risk. And I've included governance and risk because people often believe or think that Agile PM doesn't cover governance and risk. It does. And there'll be an opportunity to actually take any questions from you at the end as well. So just to introduce myself, as Gemma kindly said, my name's Gavin Treacy. I'm an ILX Senior Training Consultant. I think the senior is more to do with my age and the colour of my hair than anything else. I deliver a range of subjects for ILX, such as Agile Project Management itself, Agile Business Analyst, Scrum, Scrum Master, Scrum Product Owner, Prince 2, Prince 2 Agile, and also the APM qualifications. I'll say this without doubt. Agile is my favorite subject to teach. And the reason I enjoy Agile so much is because it is so people-centered. It's a user-centric design, but it's also incredibly focused on the people within the project team as well. We'll talk a little bit about how Agile PM version 3, because that's what we're going to be referring to, does talk about Agile project management, but has put a significant emphasis onto leadership. Okay, as well as doing course delivery, I also do consultancy work in helping businesses actually find their own bespoke ways of Agile working and their own ways of working for other project approaches as well. So I'm going to look to talk you through Agile PM in 30 minutes. So not easy, challenge accepted. I'm going to be taking the foundation element itself as a 2-day course and the practitioner is a 2-day course. So I'm going to condense that into 30 minutes for you. If you do want to connect with me on LinkedIn, feel free. Always happy to meet new people and connect with new people. And you can actually copy the QR code from my LinkedIn just there. So let's start with what is Agile and Agile PM, a very brief history. So we start off with talking about something called the waterfall project approach, sometimes also known as traditional or linear or sequential. So there's nothing wrong with the waterfall project approach. It's been around for many, many years, and it had been the mainstay project approach for many organizations. Before the tech industrial revolution, which began in the late 70s and through the 80s, most projects would have been around construction type projects, civil engineering. Organizations were using project approaches to build structures, not so much mainframe systems, back end and front end. You can imagine back then in the 70s and 80s, apps didn't really exist through then, did they? Who remembers their Nokia mobile phones? So things began to change. Organizations found that waterfall perfectly suitable, and I don't ever want to be accused of waterfall bashing. It is the go-to project approach for many projects. But when the tech revolution came along, projects began to require innovation. You have to remember that organizations that wanted a system building, they didn't just pull down Microsoft 365 off the shelf, because that didn't exist. Things were being built bespoke. That is happening again at the moment. Many organizations are having bespoke systems built, as well as off the shelf, using systems that are actually designed to meet the needs of their own organization. What would happen with waterfall, though, is often waterfall has a habit of delivering the solution at the end. So what was the issue there? Well, what if the solution wasn't the right solution? What if the solution wasn't something that would work for the client? What if it didn't have the right quality? What I mean by that, it was a system that people couldn't use or wouldn't use. Perhaps it just wasn't the right system, or it was still full of too many bugs. Well, that would require the project needing extra time and extra budget. So projects that require the innovation, for this we use the term VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. Well, they needed different ways of working. As I say, waterfall is still a perfectly good project approach. And in fact, waterfall can be combined with Agile to create a hybrid project approach, something we see a lot of at the moment. But there is no, how can I put it, off the shelf approach for hybrid with between waterfall and agile. That's where often we'll go into organizations and help with that bespoke consultancy approach to help them find a way of working that suits their organization. But if you do want to use a full project approach, this is where agile project management comes in. So what about the need for business agility in a VUCA world? Well, as I said, VUCA is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. If I walk through these, see if you can recognize any of this from any of your projects. Volatile describes a tendency to change quickly and unpredictably. Familiar? Uncertainty, a lack of clarity or precision related to a future state. Complexity describes a whole that is made up of many interrelated parts. I'm sure that's familiar. And ambiguity describes something that can be understood in more than one way. Well, AgilePM is designed to help organizations and those people within the projects thrive in VUCA environments, because it's very much about collaborative ways of working. It's very much embracing change, because Agile sees changes for the positive. Change is about delivering the right solution, not just the first thing we come up with. It's about that word quality again. And we look to do this by delivering incrementally. This is a big difference between agile ways of working and waterfall. We don't deliver something at the end of the project. We look to deliver value through the project, and encouraging having sight of the solution, not just reading about it in reports. Governance is actually fine. We incorporate that into it. We want people to witness progress and see the solution through the project, not just at the end. That way, if changes need to be made, we know about them sooner and not later. This is all about making projects less likely to deliver the wrong solution and be over time and over budget. So what is Agile? Well, VUCA and the changes I've talked about through the 80s and 90s, this led to project approaches being created that focus very much on the variables of time, cost, and quality. Quality became fixed, not variable. That's very important. And this is so that VUCA could be incorporated and embracing change. Now, you might recognize this and have seen it before. It's actually based on something called the iron triangle, which has been around for a long, long time. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in the presentation. You may have seen another variant of this where here we've got time, cost, quality. You may have seen something called the iron hexagon: time, cost, quality, scope, risk, and benefits. But Agile really likes to keep it simple, keep it straightforward. And so time, cost, and quality are going to become fixed, because that's what's actually happened through the development of Agile through the 1990s. New approaches were constantly being sought by those working in the industry. First one was actually something called rapid application development. That was the first approach to use the concept of time boxes and Moscow prioritization. I'll talk more about Moscow later. The other word you might hear for time boxes is sprints. Rapid application development led to something called the dynamic systems development method. And it's that has led us to agile project management. Scrum, you'll probably be familiar with, which is not a project approach, as many people think it is. It's actually product delivery. That is now being incorporated into AgilePM version 3. And I'll talk more about that later. And of course, Kanban. Well, when you see phrases like Kanban, you'll recognize that a lot of agile ways of working have come from Toyotaism, the Toyota way. If you've not read it, by the way, I do recommend, if you're having a career in project management, grab the book, The Toyota Way. It's an excellent read and will explain a lot about what actually happened. It's had a big impact on our ways of working. Kanban, Kaizen are some other examples. This is all to do with lean thinking and transparency. So these were all being incorporated, okay? These approaches were actually not called agile until 2001, when the creation of the Agile Alliance created something called the Agile Manifesto. And I'll talk you through that next. So the Agile Manifesto is about individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, excuse me, and responding to change over following a plan. Now, something very important to recognize with this, it says over, not instead of, which is often a common misconception. There is value in the items on the right, and AgilePM, well, Agile itself as a family recognizes that. We very much talk about these ways of working coming from Agile, but there is still a need for traditional ways of working within a project, and they can be tailored into your project approach. So we're not saying instead of, we're saying that they value the items on the right, but we value those on the left more. In 2010, DSDM was becoming quite prominent, but APMG, they're the awarding body for the exam process. They recognized the gap in the market. They collaborated with a not-for-profit organization called the Agile Business Consortium, and AgilePM was born. It's gone through a few iterations itself, and it's now on actually version 3. Now, one key bit that I really like to point out is that in the past number of years that I delivered AgilePM, I've seen many different organizations incorporate Agile PM ways of working. But people often think it's for the IT world, it's for digital. It isn't. I've delivered Agile to organizations. First time I ever used it, by the way, was marketing to actually release a new product into the market. The time, cost, and quality element was absolutely key to that. And I've used it in marketing. I've seen it used in design consultancy. We've delivered it into pharmaceuticals, even delivered it into the military. So it's got a wide range of uses. So now we tend to talk about working solutions as opposed to just working software. So what is AgilePM? Well, 2010 was the first version. That was version 1. AgilePM version 2. I don't know if any of you have actually taken any of these or sat these courses. And then the latest, of course, is 2025 was AgilePM version 3. We've had an update to that recently as well. We're now actually on to the second edition because it's gone through an iteration, which we'd expect it to do. So let's talk more about how does it work. And we'll look through some key areas. Very importantly, the PM in AgilePM is for project management. It addresses a full project life cycle. The A to B that a project has. A project by its very definition must have a beginning and an end. Sometimes Agile, when you look at Agile as a family of different approaches, it can actually feel a little bit daunting because many organizations are used to a very prescriptive way of working. We understand why that is. Governance and control, of course, is important to a project. As I always say, in any project, course delivery I do, every project is always spending somebody else's money, achieving somebody else's objectives. And we have to be mindful of that, hence the need for governance and control. Well, we can still have a project approach without it becoming too prescriptive, so that we can embrace change, so that we have the flexibility, so it retains the traditional concepts of project management, project delivery, creating a project environment. It's built for flexibility and change management. It allows project managers to be able to handle change effortlessly in a different way. The project manager still has 360-degree transparency. They're still able to demonstrate control. What Agile wants to do is empower subject matter experts to be subject matter experts. What we're trying to avoid with AgilePM, that whilst the project manager is a point of escalation and exceptions, not every decision has to go through the project manager, because the danger there of doing so is that the project manager becomes a bottleneck themselves. I mean, how often as a project manager, how many of you there are often working on just one project, or a project and not your day job? Many often got many plates to actually spin. And not always is a project manager a subject matter expert themselves. So issues being raised constantly up to the project manager can create that bottleneck. The posh name being it for a critical single point of failure. Okay, so the project manager is still there as a point of escalation, but we actually now want to allow more collaborative ways of working between subject matter experts and that voice of the end user, the voice of the customer. It can be adaptable to any industry and project size. It does scale down very nicely to small projects, but it also will scale up very happily. AgilePM is currently being used in the public sector over numerous digital transformation projects and programs, scales up very well. And often in those cases, it is incorporated into a hybrid way of working as well, to meet the very much strict governance needs that we see in the public sector. It helps people within the project team be agile. It helps manage change management that you will actually expect in any project where users are going to be impacted, and it can do that in a seamless way. So some more key points about it. It is an incremental approach, looking to deliver value early. That value could be a proof of concept, it could be a prototype. Value can even be finding out what doesn't actually work. But it also can be delivering solutions. When we come on to the phases, I'll talk you through how Agile, when we come to deployment, gives us various options there. And it will also, sorry if you're getting a pop-up, it will also empower people, as I say, at the right levels. And we want those subject matter experts to be subject matter experts. It's collaborative in its nature, so that people feel part of the project. They feel part of the project. They begin to take ownerships. And it's very much focused on not just the project team, but also the customer and end users, making sure that their needs and their requirements are recognized, understood, and achieved. And we do this regularly through incremental delivery. Now, what it will also do is look to use, you might recognize this term, JIT planning. Okay, anyone can say it out. I know your microphones are off. Say it out loud to yourself if you know what it is. Just in time planning. Okay, now Agile will admit happily it did borrow from Toyotaism, and that's where that comes from, of course. Don't confuse just in time planning with Justin Timberlake planning. That's something completely different. So this is about not getting into too much detail too soon, because that can involve having to revisit that detail and having to replan again and again and again. And that can become time consuming, it can become wasteful, and it can actually become demotivating, and it can cause stakeholders to lose confidence. And we do that itself through incremental delivery and incremental planning. Agile likes to bring along a mindset, a culture, and it does this. It's supported by the 8 principles. Will focus very much on the business need. When we talk about business in Agile, we're talking about the organization paying for the project, but in turn, we're very much thinking about the customer and the end user as well. We'll collaborate at all levels, making sure that everybody in the project is empowered and aware of the project and how its objectives are. We'll make sure that we don't get into too much detail too soon. We will know just enough by having firm foundations. Communicate continuously and clearly. I think it's common knowledge that without doubt, one of the biggest causes of project failures is often down to poor communication. We'll deliver on time. This has been a strong reason why it's been incorporated by so many organizations, that establishing an endpoint of a project and working to achieve that, to avoid project overruns. So can an agile project actually have to push back its end date? It can do, yes. Okay. It's not without accepting change, as I mentioned, but that decision would have to come from a senior level within the organization. So we're very focused on delivering on time, cost, and quality. And we make sure that we don't compromise quality. Quality is making sure that the solution does what it's supposed to do. It's something that people can use and will use. We're not going to deliver a solution that's going to be requiring to be keep revisited in the post-project. Yes, we know that's going to happen. Bugs will appear in any kind of new product that we release. The best people to test something, of course, the best testers on the planet are always an end user. But we want to make sure we hand something over that's got the right quality, because if not, it's going to have an impact on whether or not we achieve the benefits. We'll develop iteratively. We're very much recognizing that the first solution may not be the right one, and we anticipate making changes. But all of this is going to happen while the project manager is also able to demonstrate control, but without having to, it's difficult to avoid another phrase of this, without having to micromanage people. Anyone who's ever worked in an environment of micromanagement will know that a micromanager is a very busy and often tired manager. So it's creating, again, a different culture and a way of working through collaborative practices. It supports the Agile Business Consortium's underlying philosophy that best business value emerges when projects are aligned to clear business goals, deliver frequently, and involve the collaboration of motivated and empowered people. It's that motivated and empowered people is why I'm such a fan of Agile. It's very much, as I say, people-focused approach. So what about Scrum? You may or may not be familiar with Scrum. Unfortunately, I don't quite have the time in 30 minutes to teach you fully about Scrum. But Scrum is going to be at the heart of team level development. AgilePM is going to bring us the project management. Scrum is going to bring us the product delivery. Now, just to mention, you don't have to use a Scrum approach in an Agile project. So if you don't have established teams already, then you can actually use just what we call Agile delivery teams. I'll mention more about that when we come on to roles. So Scrum itself, created in the mid-90s by a couple of gentlemen, one called Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber. Scrum itself is not a project approach. Scrum was actually created to deal initially with the backlog of errors that had actually come from a significant program investment in the United States. And it was to avoid a project having to be almost restarted. Instead, no, we will fix that backlog. And it does so by using an ordered and prioritized backlog and using a time box approach called sprints. Scrum brings its own framework and it's very good at dealing with complex products and complex problems. It brings its own valuables. It brings its own practices. It's not prescriptive in its nature, but it does bring us 5 events that we can actually utilize to create a cadence and a rhythm to the way of working. Scrum is now fully integrated into AgilePM, and it's an option. It doesn't have to be the way, but it is a way of working. What Scrum also has, which is why it suits AgilePM so strongly, it's very much focused on collaboration and clear roles. It recognizes the importance of a team being a team and allowed to get on with its job. There are accountabilities within the team, so everybody knows what their role is and their part to play. They set clear horizons and using both, well, AgilePM, just to explain, we'll use long horizons, long planning horizons, the A to B of a project, and then break it up into increments. Now, you might be used to using the phrase phases or stages. Increments are just another way of approaching that and can either align with your stages or milestones, or you can actually put increments inside those milestones if you want to. We talk more about that in the course, as you can imagine. What it does, it gives you options in your approach. And those shortest planning horizons are the sprints that Scrum uses, also, as I say, often known as time boxes. And the team will plan to those. So how does that help? Well, the team are aligned to an objective. If we're achieving that objective, we know earlier. But what about if we're not? We know sooner so that we can deal with it and fix it or make an alternative decision. It's about having clear communication, collaboration, and the project flow. But we're very much witnessing progress and not just reading about it. This is a big shift from project management to leadership. The project manager is still a project manager, but it's now very much about getting the best out of people within the project team. Project manager can't be everybody in the project team. So it's now brought in 9 leadership principles that it asks the project manager to think about. Their actions speak louder than words. You probably look at this and think, well, surely these are common sense. Again, that's one of my favorite things about AgilePM. It really does apply common sense and pragmatism. Quality of thinking, improve quality of thinking leads to improve outcomes. AgilePM is asking the project manager to lead by example and to create this culture. Organizations prove through effective feedback. This is important. Agile encourages psychological safety. People shouldn't be keeping problems quiet to themselves. They should actually feel that they can safely raise, there's a problem here with something, there is an issue. So we know about issues as they happen, not at the end. In fact, what AgilePM says about news is there is no good news or bad news in a project. It's just news. They're both of equal value. We want to know about them as they happen, not when it's too late to deal with them. People require meaning and purpose to make work fulfilling. They should understand their role, their objective, and their purpose. Leadership lives everywhere. Everybody has the ability to lead, and everybody, rather than just the owners being on the project manager. People have devolved their appropriate power and authority. This is about people being empowered to make decisions within their own scope and not having to guide everything up to the project manager. Anyone can have ideas, anyone can have feedback. And it's very much an emotive way of working. It's a foundation to enhance creativity and innovation. We know that when people are micromanaged, innovation and creativity decreases because people are more stressed and they're probably not enjoying their role as they should do, and they're less likely to come up with new ideas and new suggestions. And the last of them, collaborative communities achieve more than individuals. It's avoiding that silo mentality. You may have heard of a chap called Bruce Tupman. If you're thinking sounds familiar, you're more likely to recognize the phrase forming, storming, norming, performing. Okay. Storming is something a team may go through, but we don't want to stay there too long. What we're looking for is performing. For a team to be performing, you fundamentally need 2 key areas. 1, that the team has an aligned objective or objectives, and 2, that the team has aligned ways of working. When a team reaches performing, they've got the ability to work with, and this is a subjective phrase I appreciate, but the team have got the ability to work with the minimum amount of supervision, achieve an objective, and they'll be allowed to get on with it. And that's got to be done through teams having clearly defined objective ways of working, but the right culture and objectives and goals to achieve. We want to achieve that in Agile through not having silo mentality. So let's look at this in more detail. So what I'm going to go through with you next is the Agile phases. So when I show you the next diagram, you might blink and shake your head and go, hang on a second, there's a lot going on there. Gavin, can you talk me through it? Well, yes, I can, and I will talk you through it. So here we go. As we can see, this is the phases. Now it follows a path. And if I just do this first of all, that is the basic A to B of an Agile project. Okay. But what about all of these? What's going on here? Okay, what does this mean with multiple paths available? What's going on in this box? Well, that's what I'm going to walk you through now. So this is the bit, when I'm teaching this at first, if people have come from a prescriptive background in project management, it can feel a little bit strange at first. What the Agile project lifecycle gives is options. This is so important. Again, it's one of the reasons I like it. I won't go this into too much detail because we do have a limited amount of time and I don't want to turn this into a 2-hour walkthrough. Feasibility, high level thinking. I call this whiteboard level thinking. If we were to start this project, would we be able to go ahead? Looking at the concept and the deliverables from a high level, but not getting drawn into detail at this point. So I call this whiteboard level thinking at this point. Then we'll go through a go, no go. Sometimes terminology matters, doesn't it? What does that mean? Go, no go, stage boundary, stage gate, milestone, approval gate, all of those things. If you do ever work in a project organization and your project is scaling up enough, I'd consider creating a glossary of terms so that people know what these different phrases mean to avoid confusion. If not, we end up with people sometimes getting confused when they're talking about the same thing. When we move into foundations, now we're going to plan the project. We're going to define the project. We also start to bring project team members in now, not in delivery, so that we can start going through that Tuckman's process of forming, storming, norming, performing. Remember, when you create a project, your project is a unique endeavor. The chances are you're going to bring a team together who, as a whole, have not always worked together before. We want to start that team and social cohesion early in the foundations phase. At the end of foundations is another go, no go, and this allows our project sponsor again to make an informed decision as to whether or not the project should go any further. After that, we're now going to move into what we call product delivery. Okay, and this is where you can have choice. You can use Scrum if that's an option. If not, you just use your subject matter experts. We'll now be using the concepts of sprints or time boxes to be able to plan and review, plan and review, plan and review. Now we'll get to the point where we achieve an incremental goal. That could be, for example, a particular objective of achieving detailed requirements if you chose to do that in the project, or it could be a proof of concept, it could be a prototype, it could be an early working solution. We've got options on that. So we'll come to the end of that initial first goal, and now we move into something called assemble, review, and deploy. Now that deployment here, as it says, multiple paths available. This is again where Agile gives us options. The option could be that we fully deploy, we fully go live with something if we want to. We have an early version of something that's going to actually go now to our customer base. Our users are going to start using the first part of delivery. But we might not be ready to do that yet. Instead, we might do a partial release. Now, this is where we might be doing beta, is a term you'll often hear here. We actually get a version out to a controlled group. We could, if we want to, be going to user acceptance testing, or in a non-IT world, would be focus groups. Getting that early feedback without fully releasing. The point is here that you've got control and you've got choice about how you choose to do this. The other option could be that we have sign off, but we actually hold on to that early deliverable or solution because it's almost like it's the jigsaw piece that's waiting for the other jigsaw pieces. Now, we've got a couple of arrows here where we've got options between the two. Let me talk about this one here, option one, I'll call that. Should the project decide to, we've got a very collaborative project. It could be, decision could be that the sponsor has witnessed progress and quite happily says to the project manager, cool, move on to the next increment. What we're trying to do there is maintain that. It's almost like Newton's cradle. You'll know how important momentum can be to a project sometimes, but we also know sometimes you've got to actually pull back that momentum a little bit, keep control. But there is the option there, if need be, for the sponsor to give a simple verbal nod. I'll drop you an email or a text. I'm happy. Move on to the next increment. But a lot of you may come from an organization. If I look at option two here, where governance is key. Totally understand that. Very much recognize the need for that because a project is spending somebody else's money. If need be, we can actually go back to foundations and we can now revisit the project from a governance perspective. If it's part of a program, this may likely be the case. You may need a milestone review. This could be monthly or quarterly, whichever you need it to be. But now the project is now going to go back through a formal go, no go before moving into the next increment. Okay. And then the last part to look at is that when we've got Nothing left to deliver will move into the post-project. But just coming back to this realization here, well, the realization is the realization of benefits. And most projects will achieve those only in the post-project environment. Agile can actually start to achieve benefits early through incremental approach. Actually, not only getting feedback, but also getting benefits as well. As a minimum, through some kind of release or early deployment, we should at least get the feedback, but we can also achieve benefits in some cases. The majority of benefits will still be achieved in the post-project, but you can see how we've got options with this. There's a lot more to what's going on here than just my overview, but you can appreciate time with what we're doing today. So when we come back to the various paths, Agile again gives us more options. So when we think about delivery of a project, and again, you're probably looking at this diagram and you might be thinking there's a lot going on here, Gavin. Can you talk me through it, Gavin? Yes, I can. Right. So let's look at example 1. Quite a small, simple project. And that's an increment. So, excuse me, my writing's terrible, isn't it? Do that again. You know what? I might be left-handed and I've never actually tried it. There you go. That's an increment. And here, the beginning of the project is the A to B, and we deliver the solution at the end. But we've used 3 sprints or time boxes to get there. So what we've got is a review taking place throughout the project. Okay. If you look at the next option, there's the A to B, the life cycle of the project again. But now I have an increment here, an increment here, split into a couple of time boxes or sprints, but we will have some sort of solution here, an early part of the deliverable. But now that trivial pursuit wedge there, or that daily cheesecake, if we're going to go back to foundations for a formal review of the project before we go any further. You might even, in some cases, there actually be almost taking a break while we wait for feedback from users, for example. If you look at example 3, there again is the full project life cycle of A to B. And now we're using short increments. Just a note as well, by the way, this can be multiple teams working at the same time if it's a scaled up environment. It can be single teams. Each of these is an individual increment. We've also got the option for a formal review. And what we're doing here is we're delivering those jigsaw pieces through each increment. Again, they could be going fully live. They could be going into a controlled environment, such as user acceptance testing or focus groups, or just being signed off and held back for the other jigsaw pieces to be created. And last but not least, single increments, single sprints, or time boxes, each delivering. That's going to be a dynamic, rapid moving project. That's going to be very collaborative in nature. I tend to find a lot of organizations will finding themselves working with example 2 or 3. And that's where you can actually start building into that hybrid approach if need be, and making sure that the project is still being governed correctly. Any of these options can be applied. So just thinking about that A to B, the beginning and end of a project, it's important we achieve that. If every single time a project was allowed to deliver late and over budget, more time, more cost, quality is likely to be impacted, and we're likely to see that we don't achieve our benefits. And it's just generally not good for the organization, is it? So this is where Agile created something called the project variables. So when we talk about non-Agile, we're talking about waterfall. But again, I don't want you to think of Agile as waterfall bashing. But a lot of waterfall projects, when they were having to deal with VUCA, now, if I just think of a waterfall project, most waterfall projects are excellent at delivering on time. Okay, it's not unusual for a new civil engineering build to deliver what it said it would within budget and actually on time as well. When VUCA comes in, that's where it starts to get a little bit wobbly. The features become fixed because they are agreed up front. So your requirements are agreed up front. But if they start to become more complex or there are delays, this is where we see quality comes under pressure and can depreciate if we're not careful. And the project often would ask for more time and more money. Well, here, what Agile wants to do instead is that time, cost, and quality become fixed, and it does so through the concepts of sprints and time boxes. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but the view is that if our time boxes or sprints achieve time, cost, and quality, or our increments achieve time, cost, and quality, or projects achieve time, cost, and quality. Is that the reality? No, not at all. Projects are dynamic environments with a lot of moving parts and, of course, people. But if we do need to have increased budget, or if we do need to actually extend the timescale of the project, we know sooner, not just at the end. We don't find ourselves having to make a decision based on the sunk cost philosophy. We're making that decision because we can see that the project is more challenging earlier as opposed to in the last 20% or 10% of the project lifecycle. Features will become variable, and Agile will use Moscow to do so. And the project will be prioritized from high to low. And should it be that the musts and the more valuable requirements need more effort, then we can de-scope lower priority requirements into what we call won't have this time. I'll talk a little bit more about Moscow in a moment. Well, on the next slide, actually. So what does won't have this time mean? It's just not being delivered in this time frame. It's not being delivered in this time, this sprint or this increment. In some cases, we may even agree to deliver something as a post-project activity. A must-have is something that is vital. Okay, without this, the project becomes unsafe, illegal, or unwanted, unusable. So we've got to deliver those. Should-haves are very much about value. A should-have requirement will often make a must-have work better. It make it perform better. It make it more aesthetic, easy to use. It tends to add that value. Whereas a could-have, well, that's like the difference between a want and a need. A could-have is like the sprinkles on an ice cream. It's something that we say, okay, right, it's not going to hurt us if we don't deliver it now. It's a temporary workaround. Well, a could-have, if need be, compared to a should-have, what's the difference? I often get asked this. A should-have, we're going to notice it more. It should only be temporary. A could-have, if need be, may actually have to become a permanent feature of not being delivered or delayed till much later. The project will be anticipating delivering everything, but this gives us a fallback option in the event of those must-have requirements needing more effort to achieve quality. Because when you go through iterative development cycles, it's not unusual that we don't achieve that quality at the first attempt. So the issue is, what if we need more attempts than we expected? If we expected an amount of time or effort on a particular feature or functional requirement, what if we reach the end of that? We've not done it. Do we deliver something that's not of the right quality? No, Agile says you go again until eventually you achieve the right quality, or we make a decision to perhaps change the scope. Okay, but we know as it happens, not at the end. But this has got to mean we're going to have collaborative ways of working. We must build and test as we go. Each iteration is taking us towards incremental delivery. Now, those deliverables can actually, as I mentioned earlier on, they can be deployed into some environment, either fully or into a controlled environment, or they may actually be held and actually sign off to be added into the solution later. Each increment, though, is allowing us to get early feedback and potentially early benefits. What we're doing is, if you think of the life cycle of a project, we're getting value early and not just at the end of the project. So if something is wrong or right, we know about it as it happens, not just at the end of the project. So Agile does create an organizational structure of roles and responsibilities. I won't go into, again, this too much in this because this is, like, imagine when they're doing this as a course, we spend a good amount of time on this. But you will see that you've got your levels that you'd expect to see in any project. We've got our project level roles. You might call that your project board, for example. And our sponsor is the single head of the project. Well, the sponsor will collaborate with other project roles, the business visionary, senior voice of the user, think of them like that, the architect, technical lead, and the project manager. But the project manager is part of the project role, part of that project board, so to speak. And that's because we agree objectives with the delivery teams, we agree ways of working, and we can let them get on with it. Here, you're using a Scrum team. But if you haven't got Scrum, absolutely fine. We can replace the product owners and developers and Scrum masters with other roles. Roles can be combined if need be as well. So if you have a team of subject matter experts, we can map them in there. Other roles as required, such as advisory roles that act on a consultancy basis, can also be brought in. And the roles are labeled by their area of expertise within the project. Is it technical, that's solution delivery? Is it about value and being customer focused, that value ownership? And then is the processes that actually the project environment itself. The Scrum roles fit into that nicely because each of those roles naturally do the same. The developer being very much customer focused and technical, the product owner being very much around meeting customer requirements, and the Scrum Masters around creating an appropriate environment. If you're not familiar with Scrum, there is no one leader within a Scrum team. There is no manager. It's a collaborative environment with a flat hierarchy. Each role has its own accountability, and they work as a collaborative team to achieve goals. They will also create psychological safety, so we're understanding the progress and we're not having to almost scrape around to get that progress. It's just a natural part of Scrum about how it offers transparency. There's no confusion about what the roles are, and each of them meeting the need of process, customer focus, and technical expertise. So what about the governance? Because this is all very well, but many people come from projects where you may be working in the public sector, for example. You're spending taxpayers' funds, and there's, of course, the golden rule of making best use of taxpayers' funds. But in any organization, if we're given the accountability to actually take on a project, we've got to deliver what's expected. So governance, we never compromise quality. We'll talk a bit more about governance in a while as well, by the way. Governance is about being achieved through the correct process. So when we talk about never compromise quality, one side of that is the deliverable in Agile does what it's supposed to do. It's a product that people can use and will use. Because if we don't achieve those, we're not achieving the benefits. What about the process? Well, some of you might be familiar with this phrase. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. That's quite common in project management, isn't it? It's all very well having a solution, but where's the evidence of how that time and effort was spent? Processes will be established as part of the planning of the project, and they can actually be planned in the foundation phase, and then they become part of the quality. Agile uses a concept called definition of done. The definition of done is not that something has just achieved its acceptance criteria, but it's been appropriately documented as well. So it's actually built in, not added on. We make sure we don't compromise quality from a deliverable perspective, but also from a governance perspective. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. The Agile project will create something called artifacts. You may have recognized this term as being management products. It's a bit like calling them standard operating procedures for a project. Again, I'm not going to walk through all of them because you can imagine that would take some time. Calls them artifacts because artifact just means it's a thing. It can be a document if you want it to. It can be a Word document, it can be a PDF, it could be an Excel, but it also could be something written on a whiteboard if need be, or built into software. But it creates our ways of working, but it also creates our backlogs. What Agile does, if you notice, is that these will grow and deliver over time as and when we need the information. So if you notice in feasibility, there's not a lot of management product work taking place. And that's because it doesn't want to get drawn too soon into bureaucracy we don't need. When we do need that record keeping and governance, and we do need that backlog of requirements, then it appears. You'll notice as well the difference between recommended, optional, required. Required simply means Agile doesn't like to become across prescriptive. It doesn't say mandatory, but kind of what it means. You don't have to use those. They're not the definitive list. They're a suggestion. And you can, again, adapt that into your own organization. Again, this is where we do a lot of consultancy work, coming up with bespoke ways of working to suit the needs of a particular organization. So it's giving you the flexibility, but you'll notice as well that each of the artifacts or management products has a focus on certain areas. Okay. The management approach definition does come in quite early, and so does the delivery plan. We start thinking about that soon, because that's going to very much manage achieving our benefits and our project environment. So coming back again to governance, what about risk management as well? Quality and governance controls are about having predictable success. We make sure that quality is not compromised from a governance perspective. The framework makes sure that we understand the objectives and the quality criteria, both deliverables and governance requirements. When you think about the go, no go that I mentioned earlier on, and going back to foundations, that's an ideal opportunity to actually do a governance check, or if need be, to do an audit. Or if you're working with a program, and maybe you're working with a program business partner, to allow that milestone review and formal check of the project. But we make sure that everybody in the project understands what this looks like and how it should actually be carried out. We're avoiding having to have gaps in audit trails, and making sure that we can pass that audit when it happens and then we're compliant, but also making sure that we're meeting business needs from a product and governance perspective. So what about risk? It's built in, not bolted on. We make sure that we actually have risk management built in. It's not as a separate layer. It's part of what Agile does. Agile will look at risk from two perspectives. It will look at it from an external perspective, your PESTLE, but also risk to the project approach. We'll talk more about that project approach, but there are many opportunities as the project is broken down to actually talk about the risks. And risks are not discussed just by the project level. You may have heard this phrase: who are the best people to estimate the effort in a piece of work? The people who are going to do it. Who are the best people to estimate or sort of identify the risk to a piece of work? The people who are going to do it, the subject matter experts. They're incorporated into risk planning. Because of short planning horizons and incremental approach, the opportunity to keep revisiting risks is there. It's about having empowered teams. It's about having incremental delivery and transparency, so that risk becomes ownership of everyone in the project and not just the PM. The other thing Agile will do is something called the PAQ, the Project Approach Questionnaire. The Project Approach Questionnaire has 17 questions that it asks. And this helps us look at if there's any risk to the Agile way of working. It's completed, first of all, in feasibility and then in foundations. What it then throughout the project is very much looking to see if there's anything that could be a risk to the project approach that we want to use. It's like carrying out a gap analysis, okay? But the gap analysis around our project approach. And it will help us realize if there's things we need to do to improve on our project approach, training, coaching, developing, or if we're there. It's very much around that project maturity, okay? And again, when we've done bespoke work, I've done this in the past and actually done tailored versions of this for organizations to meet individual needs. Does it work? It's not one of these loose theories. It's like Moscow. It truly does work and highlights to you before the project starts. We need to change that before we start working, or we're already there. Fantastic. We can feel confident. It will help us identify where we've got gaps in our way of working, such as poor communication and collaboration, which we know often lead to project failure. So coming to the end of the explanation now. It's outside of 30 minutes, forgive me for that. It's not easy to try and get a 2-day course into 30 minutes. Okay, so let's just talk about AgilePM training. Well, we can deliver this in a number of different ways. We do both the foundation and the practitioner. We can deliver it through self-study and e-learning. We do also live virtual classroom, and we also do on-site classroom. But all of these can be blended into one as well. If an organization wants to know about incorporating Agile ways of working and actually would like to go through it without taking the exams, yeah, we can do that as well. Again, just like Agile, we've got many different options to help people understand Agile and actually learn how to learn and study about it. Is Agile growing? Well, Agile has already gone through a massive exponential growth, but the exponential growth is huge at the moment because there are a number of digital transformation projects. But also, as I mentioned, it's being picked up by organizations outside of digital, but other projects that have that VUCA. The exams themselves, should you want to go down the exam route, the exams are multiple choice. So there's no written answers. 50 questions for the foundation. Pass mark is 25 out of 50. So a hard pass, you get 25, you've passed. 40 minutes, very doable. Closed book. So there's a fair amount of remembering your content there. There's no prerequisites. You're ready to go when you've done enough study. The AgilePM practitioner, you need to have passed foundation first. It's based on 4 scenario-based questions with just one scenario. It is multiple choice, as I say, no written answers. 60 questions, and the pass mark is 30 out of 60. Again, you score 30, you passed. Remember, by the way, a pass is a pass. Okay, 2.5 hours, very doable. But this one is open book, so you can use your textbook to refer to as well. Okay, right. That brings me to the end of my talk through. So thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you very much for listening to me. What we'll do now, I'll bring Gemma back in and ask if we have any questions that we can answer for you. Gemma.
Okay. Oh, that was so good. Thanks, Gavin. Really informative and great session. So no questions of yet, but I just was thinking about one. So would I need experience in Agile if I wanted to take this course?
Well, no, absolutely not. I'm seeing a tremendous amount of people at the moment who this actually is their first step into project management. And I actually think this is an ideal way to get into project management because it is so focused on what I believe is the direction and culture that many organizations want to go into, which is being people-centered. Agile incorporates beautifully either working in co-located spaces or working from home and hybrid. So even though people may not be in the same office, Agile still approaches how do we actually tackle keeping communication up if people are dispersed or working from home. And so it is actually I think it's an ideal way of getting into project management because Agile is becoming so popular in so many different organizations. Don't need any experience at all.
So then sort of leads to the next one. So how would you know if Agile is the right approach for your organization?
Oh,
is that another session?
I would use the word when looking at the project, understanding what our project's objectives are. Where is it we want to be? Where are we now? And where do we want to be? The as is and the to be. And we look at how we're going to get there. And it's really about using comparison of the word known versus unknowns. If we've got a lot of certainty in our project and it's quite straightforward, we understand what we're going to build and how we're going to get there, may or may not need Agile. But when you start moving to more unknowns, then project approaches such as Agile become more valuable. But I'd also say it's in line with the culture that you want to create within your organization as well. If you want to create a culture of people being empowered and collaborative ways of working, and even though the project manager always demonstrates control, but it's taking a lot of the onus of the project manager, I think Agile is another way of working as well. If you want your projects to, in the main, finish on time and within budget and deliver a solution that delivers quality, I'd say Agile is also something to consider as well. It is becoming very popular in the public sector for that very reason.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. So we have had a question in. So time, cost, quality, if you fix them hard, then the project may fail. Moscow, you might only get the M, and that's hopeful. Yeah. In the real world, the ion triangle is king. Your view. I hope I've pronounced those all correct.
No, absolutely, totally agree with that. I hope I mentioned this and touched on this through the presentation. Time, cost, and quality should be an objective that we strive to achieve. We know that projects are constantly being bombarded by risks and issues. Risk and issues can come from within the project environment, but external as well. We have to recognize that maybe a need that the project has to make an alteration to its project scope. That can mean, though, the decision has to be made to extend the amount of time and budget. 2 things on this. Can it happen? Absolutely. Yeah. But the decision is made at an organizational level. But the key thing is that we know about it early as it happens, and not just when we get to the end of the project. So maintaining time, cost and quality becomes our goal, absolutely. But it doesn't mean to say that it actually is always maintained. But the decision can be made by the organization to either offer a project more time and more budget to achieve those benefits, or if need be, we could actually change the scope of the project at a high level. Key thing is that we know about it as it happens, not just at the end of the project when we're in the last 10 or 20% of the life cycle. Yeah, it should be king. I completely agree. Is it always achievable? No, because there's so many variables impacting on a project and it's so dynamic. Yep, I hope that answered that for you.
Right, well, actually, we've just got another one too. When you talked about risk and issues, you did not mention mitigation plans. How does that fit into Agile? Is it built in?
It's built in, yeah. If in any risk management, when we talk about risks and issues, we've always got to recognize the difference between the two. A risk is something that might happen, an issue is something that is happening. Okay. If I talk about what keeps a project manager busy on a day-to-day basis, risks, yes, but issues are what truly keep us busy on a day-to-day basis, solving problems. I want to try and delegate a lot of those problems to the subject matter experts within reason and scope of empowerment. But the risk itself still have to be assessed, because from an organizational perspective, where does risk tolerance come from? Where does the attitude to risk in a project come from? Whoever's actually writing the checks, they make that decision. So we've got to look at both high level and also medium and low level risks as well that are pertinent at the levels of the project. When we talk about the word mitigation, what does that mean? Well, that's about reduction. We still take the same approach that we would do in any project about whether or not we make a decision to go ahead or to change something. I'm doing risk management in a really short sentence there. It's approached the same way you would do in any project. But the difference is that we're reviewing it more frequently because of the use of short planning horizons. Risks become more known, they become a wider awareness of risk within the project organization. But mitigation is what decision to make about that project still happens the same way. So yes, you do still have a risk strategy. Most risk strategies, of course, come from the organization who's paying for it. Yeah, absolutely, it's built in. Okay.
Brilliant. And just add another, I'm conscious of time, but I think we can go for this one too. Can you talk a bit about value and the difference with regard to benefits and ROI? The new buzzword now is value and people get confused. Is value built in, and what's the difference from benefits?
Okay, so often you'd have something like maybe called product-based planning in project management, and there's a clear link to the product and the benefits it actually achieves. And some projects we'll talk about, we only know if we're going to achieve the benefits when we begin to see the deliverable. Sometimes you may not get a deliverable because the outcome could be to work out what doesn't work. That's one of the ways I'm thinking about it, okay, with iterative development. So value is knowing about steps and progress to achieving the benefit. It's not always we have a tangible product in front of us that we can link to benefits yet. What we may have done is come up with a solution, or have actually understood requirements in more detail. But it will also value will link to the product itself. It's combining the two. It's thinking about outcomes and not just products. Understanding the value of the work we're doing towards achieving the benefits. Think of it like that. Think of the relation between, if we're doing this, what's the link towards achieving the benefits? Because without doubt, the benefits is the clear ROI, isn't it? The benefits is the reason why we're spending that time, that cost, and let's face it, disruption that projects bring around as well. Think as value as the work we're doing, a step towards achieving the benefit. And value can be a tangible deliverable. It's easy to see the benefit there, isn't it? But it also could be an outcome of realizing a concept, a direction to head in, or a direction not to head in, or understanding customer feedback. Think of the feedback as well and the value in that. Does that make sense? It's not something you can pin down. Think as value as steps towards achieving the benefits. Not everything is always tangible. Yeah,
that makes sense. Brilliant. Well, yeah, I'm just conscious we're about 4 minutes over. So thanks again, Gavin, so much for that session. And also thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you found it useful. There will be a recording sent out on Monday. And you can find out about all of our courses on the website, but you can also contact your relationship managers or get in touch via the website too. So yeah, thanks everyone, and have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks, Gavin.
Nice to meet you all. Enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks everyone. Bye.